Oh. Okay. Hello, 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 and welcome back to another lecture. My name is, another lecture. My name is Harley from the Franplay, and today we're going to be learning some full stack web development. Last night we actually completed our first project, and right now we're going to open up a few things. Open up Google, open up VS Code. We're going to go back to the Odin project. And I was looking on the Discord, and man, some of those guys, their projects are awesome. But yeah, let's let this load a little bit. There we go. Yeah, I can't wait for the new RAM to come in. It's gonna be awesome. But I'm probably gonna need to finally set. Huh? Tina, you wanna lay down? Lay down right there. Lay down. Okay. Oh, cool. Has our recipes that we were looking up. Oh, yeah, you like our little theme? I added this a while back. I think it was like 2 streams ago. Okay, so Odin project. And again, for those of you that are new, checking out these streams, one, I want to say welcome to the Odin project. That's number 1. Number 2, welcome to the channel. So, yeah, last night we did our project where we made a recipe website. And as I was saying, there, like, I saw some of the people that have uploaded it onto Discord for others to see. And this is, I mean, pretty cool. I like the functionality of it and everything. But theirs was styled really nice, and we have no styling yet. So let's learn about how to style our webpage, and maybe we can take some bits and pieces that we learned from here, and we can create some little fun pieces to our website. This is going to be a long one here. So, this is called Css Foundations. In the previous lesson, you learned how to write the HTML that determines how a web page is structured. The next step is to make that structure look good with some style, which is exactly what CSS is for. In this lesson, we're going to focus on what we believe are some fundamental CSS concepts, things that everyone should know from the beginning, whether they are just starting out or simply need a refresher. And for me, it's going to be the latter. The refresher is definitely what this is for me. I don't know if you guys could tell, but not to brag, but it was pretty decent in my coding here. Structured nicely, organized, and then of course I added my own flair with just using HTML. Added my little pictures, changed the size of the pictures, clickable links, a link that could take us back to the home page. So I thought that was pretty neat, and added my own little twist to it. Different sized headings, used a strong tag. So yeah, I think it turned out really nice, and hopefully some of you that built your own, added some flair to it too. Okay, so in this lesson we're going to be learning how to add style to HTML with CSS. We're going to understand how to use the class and ID attributes, how to add styles to specific elements using the correct selectors, and understand what the Cascade does. So the basic syntax. At the most basic level, CSS is made up of various rules. These are rules made up of a selector, more on this in a bit, and a semicolon separated list of declarations. A semicolon separated list of declarations, which each of these declarations being made up of a property value pair. So we can see here we have a selector, so div.bold-text. Right, so we're going to look for a div that's the attribute name, right? Bold text, that's going to give it the bold text in there. And the font weight, 700, and that's how much we're going to bolden that text, I believe. But yeah, this is a property that we're giving it. So selector, we're selecting wherever this attribute is, right? And then finding the property, boom, done. Alright. Oh no, I opened up a page. Whoops. Okay. A note. A div is one of the basic HTML elements. It is simply an empty container in general. It is best to use other tags such as h1 or p for content in your projects. But as we learn more about CSS, you'll find that there are many cases where the thing you need is just a container for other elements. Many of our exercises use plain divs for simplicity. Later lessons will go into much more depth about when it is appropriate to use various HTML elements. So again, everything that we're learning here is all basic. Like, there's more elements than just h1 through h6, unordered list, ordered list, list items. I've been using line breaks. You can also look what that is. But yeah, there's more than just this. I mean, there's a lot more, and we'll go more in depth in it later. And that's what I'm really liking about this whole course. Also, we pushed our project to GitHub. Oh, and if you want to see the project from start to finish on the episode before this, or the lecture before this, I mean, started about 50 minutes, and that's when I believe that's when it starts, the actual project, going through it step by step. So if you want to see how I completed it step by step, go ahead and I'll add it in the description below. But start off at the 50-minute mark, and you'll see how it progresses from just a blank text document with none of this in here into something that turns this into this, right? And of course with our images but reason why I picked a Pakistani ground beef curry in one thing, gotta do a shout out to the homie. Anyway, I won't say his name. Love you to death, bro. You know who you are. But yeah, let's continue. Sorry, I went off on a tangent. Okay, so we'll use divs and other elements later. Okay, so selectors simply refer to the HTML elements to which CSS rules apply. They're what is actually being selected for each rule. The following subsections don't cover every selector available, but they're by far the most common and the ones you should get comfortable using first. Universal selector. The universal selector will select elements of any type, hence the name universal, and the syntax for it is a simple asterisk. In the example below, every element would have the color purple styled applied to it. So if we just did that, everything will turn purple. Type selectors. Type selector or element selector will select all elements of the given element type, and the syntax is just the name of the element. So here we go. Div hello world, div hello again, hi, div okay bye. So that's in the index, and then what we'll do is div color white. So we'll change the box to white. Here, all three div elements would be selected, while the p element wouldn't be. So you can select by type, you can select all. If I can scroll up. So universal to select all. Type, you can declare a certain type. Here are all three class selectors. Class selectors will select all elements with the given class, which is just an attribute you place on an HTML element. Here's how you add a class to HTML tag and select it in CSS. So we have a div with the class of alert text, and then we'll find any div that has the class alert text and color it red. So just like how in this example up here, div dot finding the class bold text, and then we'll add font weight to it with the value. Note, the syntax for class selectors, a period immediately followed by the case-sensitive value of the attribute. Classes aren't required to be unique, so you can use the same class on as many elements as you want. Another thing you can do with the class attribute is to add multiple classes to a single element as a space-separated list, such as class alert text, severe alert. Since white space is used to separate class names like this, you should never use spaces for multi-worded names and should use a hyphen instead. Okay, so we added two classes to it. Gotcha. So if there was an alert text, we would call it like upon, like, I think this is how it works, right? An alert text. So whenever, say we click something and it's supposed to say give alert text, we'll find and pull the class alert text. It'll pop up, give us our alert text in that specific color that we assigned to it. Now if we click something else and it gives us a severe alert, or it has like a class of severe alert, when we click it, it's going to pull that severe alert for that same thing, pop it up as a different color, whatever this one was set to. And the only reason it works is because there's a space in between these two classes, right? Because they're declared separately. Never use spaces. Always use a hyphen to when you're declaring a certain thing, or you want to make it into 2 words or something like that. Okay, ID selectors. ID selectors are similar to class selectors. They select an element with the given ID, which is another attribute you place on an HTML element. ID equals title. So let's look up what ID class CSS. Okay, sorry. I was trying to find. Maybe I could find something. Simple selectors. The ID selector uses the ID attribute in HTML, and then to call an ID, we use the hashtag. Okay. So here we go, it just shows us right here. Instead of a period, we use a hashtag immediately followed by the case-sensitive value of the ID attribute. A common pitfall is people overuse the ID attribute when they don't necessarily need to. And when classes will suffice. A common pitfall is people overuse the ID attribute when they don't necessarily need to, and when classes will suffice. Well, there are cases where using an ID makes sense or is needed, such as taking advantage of specificity, Jesus Christ. How in the fuck do you say that?
Specificity.
Specificity. Okay. Well, I mean, I know it means something specific, but... Or having links redirect to a section on the current page. You should use ID sparingly, if at all. So use IDs to be able to link directly to how, like, the Odin project has the links where you can kind of click the name of the section in this lesson, and it takes you automatically to that top of that, like, oh, right here. I think this would be, oh, nope, here we go, like this would be, maybe an ID would be used there. I mean, I'm not 100%, I don't, well, we can, okay, let's inspect it actually, just to kind of see, right? Doesn't hurt. Where are we at? Selectors? Okay. Inspect the page. Here, look, we'll do that. Okay, see, yeah, this was given an ID for basic syntax. So whenever we are ready, there we go. And boom. So, pretty good. And I just wanted to show you guys that way you can kind of get an understanding. At least, you know, this is what I would be wanting to be shown if I was learning. You can kind of use your resources here and see what is inside of the web page and how it works. So that was cool. So we know that used an ID. So use it sparingly and use it to redirect. Yeah. The major difference between classes and IDs is that an element can only have one ID. An ID cannot be repeated on a single page, and the ID attribute should not contain any white space at all. Excuse me. Grouping selector. What if we have two groups of elements that share some of their style declarations? So dot read would be color white, background color black. Several unique declarations. And then the dot unread, color white, background color black. Both are read and unread unread selectors. Read and unread selectors show the color white and the background color black. Declarations, but otherwise have declarations. Oh, okay. They're both those and those declarations, but otherwise have several of their own unique declarations. To cut down on the repetition, we can group the two selectors together as a comma-separated list. So dot read and comma dot unread, and then declare in there. Both of the examples above, with and without grouping, will have the same result. But the second example reduces the repetition of declaration and makes it easier to edit either the color or background color for both classes at once. Chaining selectors. Another way to use selectors is to chain them as a list without any separation. Let's say we had the following HTML. Div. So we had a div, and then we had a div and a paragraph inside of the parent div. So div class subsection header, latest posts, p class subsection preview. This is where the preview of the post might go. Okay. Another way to use selectors. Okay. We have two elements with the subsection. Yes, we do, separated by a space. The subsection class that have some sort of unique styles. But what if we only want to apply a separate rule to the element that also has header as a second class? Well, we could chain both the class selectors together in our CSS like so. See, I never learned this. So the dot subsection and dot header, color red. What dot subsection dot header does is it selects any element that has both the subsection and header class. Notice how there isn't any space between the dot subsection and dot header class selectors. So this syntax basically works for the chaining any combination of selectors, except for chaining more than one type selector. Oh, okay. This can also be used to chain a class and an ID, as shown below. So we have subsection header and subsection ID preview. Okay, you can take the two elements above and combine the following. So the dot subsection dot header, color red, dot subsection hash preview is color blue. In general, you can't chain more than one type selector since an element can't be two different types at once. For example, chaining two type selectors like div and p would give us the selector div p, which wouldn't work since the selector would try to find a literal div p element, which doesn't exist. But you can't chain more than one type selector since... Okay. So you can only chain two together, but you can't chain more than that. Gotcha. Descendant combinator. Combinators allow us to move multiple selectors differently than either grouping or changing them. As they show a relationship between the selectors, there are 4 types of combinators in total. But for now, we're going to only show you the descendant combinator, which is represented in CSS by a single space between selectors. A descendant combinator will only cause elements that match the last selector to be selected if they also have an ancestor, parent, grandparent, that matches the previous selector. So something like .ancestor, .child will select an element with the class child. If it has an ancestor with the class ancestor, another way to think of it is child will only be selected if it is nested inside of ancestor, no matter how deep. But take a quick look at the example below and see if you can tell which elements will be selected based on the CSS rule provided. Okay, so we have .ancestor space .contents. So something like ancestor and child would select an element with the class child if it has an ancestor with the class ancestor. Gotcha. So this would only declare these B and C. In the above example, the first two elements with the contents class B and C would be selected, but the last element D won't. Would you guess correct? Yes. Because pretty much what it's saying is when you're declaring this, so that's the parent, these are the child, that's the child. So any contents within the parent that contains ancestor will be selected. So contents then will be selected are the two contents within inside of the parent or grandparent ancestor, right? Or anything that's above them is what we're picking. Or like anything that's above them that has this name, and anything that's inside of it that has this name or that class is what we're picking. Sorry, I'm just trying to reiterate it a few times. There's really no limit to how many combinators you can add to a rule, so 1, 2, 3, 4 would be totally valid. This would just select an element that has class 4 if it has an ancestor with a class of 3, and if that answer has its own ancestor with a class of 2, and so on. You generally want to avoid trying to select elements that need this level of nesting, though as it can get pretty confusing and long, it can cause issues when it comes to specificity. God dang it, specificity. Stupid word. It's a cool word though. Yes, ma'am. Okay, sorry. My boss called me. Okay. When it comes to specificity. Properties to get started with. Oh yeah, I got work tonight. There are some CSS properties that you're going to be using all the time, or at the very least more often than not. We're going to introduce you to several of these properties. Though this is by no means a complete list, learning the following properties will simply be enough to help you get started. Color and background color. The color property sets an element's text color, while background color sets, the background color of an element. I guess we're done here. Almost. Both of these properties can accept one of several kinds of values. A common one is a keyword, such as an actual color name like red, or the transparent keyword. They also accept hex, RGB, and HSL values, which you may be familiar with if you've ever used a Photoshop program or a site where you could customize your profile colors. So take a quick look at CSS legal color values to see how you can adjust the opacities of these colors by adding an alpha value. CSS colors. Colors can be specified by the following methods: hexadecimal colors with transparency, RGB colors, RGBA colors, HSL colors, HSLA colors, predefined cross-browser color names, and with the current color keyword. So hexadecimal colors are specified with hash RRGGBB, where the RR red, GG green, and BB blue hexadecimal integers specify components of the color. All values must be between 0, 0, and F, 2 Fs. For example, the hash 4 zeros, 2 Fs value is rendered as blue because the blue component is set to its highest value, FF, and the others are set to 0, 0. Let's see if it'll let me. So what if we did... That's cool. So you can change like that, and then you can change it back. That's pretty cool. So that's our style. This is our hexadecimal. So this is hexadecimal colors. It's hexadecimal colors with transparency. Now, hexadecimal colors specified with the hash RRGGBP to add transparency. Add 2 integer digits between 00 and FF. Red transparency, green transparency, and blue transparency. Let's go check them out. Cool. RGB colors. Okay, I know, I'm just messing with all the colors. Oh. I think I'm running out of interwebs. Okay, exit out of that. And then RGBA colors, which add an alpha channel, which specify opacity of the object. Ah, cool. And then HSL. Hue, saturation, and lightness. Green, light green, dark green, pastel green. Let's see what kind of colors they provide. Ah, these are nice colors. And HSL color values specified with the HS function. HSL hue. Hue is a degree on the color wheel from 0 to 360. -0 or 360 is red. 120 is green. 240 is blue. Saturation of the percentage values. 0% means a shade of gray, and 100% is a full color. Lightness is also a percentage. 0 is black. 100% is white. Okay, so the first one is the color, and then these are the percentages of gray and white. Cool. That's new. And then this has an alpha to change opacity again. So I'm actually going to add this to my friend. Huh? Okay. Sorry, love. Typography Basics and Text Align. Font family can be a single value or a comma-separated list of values that determine what font an element uses. Each font will fall into one of 2 categories. Either a font family name, like Times New Roman, we use quotes due to white spaces between words, or generic family name, like sans serif. Generic names never use quotes. If a browser cannot find or does not support the first font in a list, it will use the next one, then the next one, and so on until it finds a supported and valid font. This is why it's best practice to include a list of values for this property, starting with the font you want to be used most and ending with the generic font family as a font. Times Roman sans serif. So font family times Roman sans serif. Quotes. Font size will, as the property name suggests, set the size of the font. When giving a value to this property, the value should not contain any white space, e.g. font sign 22px. Has no space between 22 and px. Font weight affects the boldness of the text, assuming the font supports a specified weight. The value can be a keyword, font weight bold, or a number between 1 and 1,000. The equivalent 700, the equivalent of bold. Usually the numeric values will be in increments of 100 up to 900. Text align. Text align will align text horizontally with an element, and you can use common keywords you may have come across in word processors as the value for this property, e.g. text align center, or right, or justify right, or justify left. Image height and width. Images aren't the only elements that can adjust the height and width on, but we want to focus on them specifically in this case. By default, an image element's height and width values will be the same as the actual image file's height and width. If you wanted to adjust the size of the image without causing it to lose its proportions, you would use a value of auto for height property and adjust the width value. For example, if an image's original size was 500 pixels and 1000 pixels width, using the CSS above would result in a height of 250 pixels. It's best to include both properties for image elements, even if you don't plan on adjusting the values by the image file's original ones. When these values aren't included, if an image takes longer to load than the rest of the page contents, the image won't take up any space on the page at first, but will suddenly cause a drastic shift of the other page contents once it does load in it. Explicitly stating a height and width prevents this from happening, as space will be reserved on the page and will disappear as a blank space until the image loads. The cascade of CSS. Sometimes we may have rules that conflict with one another, and we end up with some unexpected results. But I wanted these paragraphs to be blue. Why are they red like these other paragraphs? As frustrating as this can be, it's important to understand that CSS doesn't just do things against our wishes. CSS only does what we tell it to do. One exception to this is the default styles that are provided by a browser. These default styles vary from browser to browser, and they are why some elements create a large gap between themselves and other elements, or why buttons look the way they do, despite us not writing any CSS rules to style them that way. If you end up with some unexpected behavior like this, it's either because these default styles are due to not understanding how a property works, or not understanding this little thing called the cascade. The cascade is what determines which rules actually get applied to our HTML. There are different factors that the cascade uses to determine this, 3 of which we'll go over to hopefully help you avoid as many of those frustrating I hate CSS moments. Specificity. A CSS declaration that is more specific will take precedence over less specific ones. Inline styles, which we'll go over more in the Adding CSS to HTML section towards the end of this lesson, have the highest specificity. Oh my god. specificity. There we go. Has the highest specificity compared to selectors. While each type of selector has its own specificity level that contributes to how specific a declaration is, other selectors contribute to specificity but are focusing only on ones mentioned in this lesson. ID selectors, most specific selector, class selectors, and then type selectors. Type is broad, you select all pretty much of whatever element that is. Class selector will select a specific class that is declared, and ID will select the most specific thing that is declared. Specificity will only be taken into account while an element has multiple conflicting declarations targeting it, sort of like a tiebreaker. An ID selector will always be any number of class selectors, a class selector will always be any number of type selectors, and a type selector will always be any number of anything else less specific than it. When no declaration has a selector with the higher specificity, a larger amount of a single selector will be a smaller amount of the same selector. Let's take a look at a few quick examples to visualize how specificity works. So rule number 1, dot subsection, color blue, dot main, dot list. In this example above, both rules are using only class selectors, but rule 2 is more specific because it is using more class selectors. So the color red declaration would take precedence. In this example above, so we have this ID subsection, color blue, and class main and class list. So anything in main that has a class list, this is what's going to be selected, but this takes precedence because its specificity is higher, because we're being more specific, and this is what we're looking for, which is ID. Alright. In the example above, despite rule 2 having more class selectors than ID selectors, rule 1 is more specific because ID beats class. In this case, the color blue declaration would take precedence. In this final example, which would be, so we have an ID, and then any class listed within the ID subsection is going to be yellow and blue, and this is ID main list, so we're going to go any, so it's going to be red because we're going to be looking for anything we're going to be more specific, right? In this final example, both rules are using ID and class selectors, so neither rule is using a more specific selector than the other. The cascade then checks the amount of each selector type. Both rules only have one ID selector, but rule 2 has more class selectors, so rule 2 has a higher specificity. While color red declaration would take precedence, the background color yellow declaration would still be applied since there's no conflicting declaration for it. So the background color would still be yellow, but the color would be red. For the, I'm guessing that's going to be for the text. Note, when comparing selectors, you may come across special symbols for the universal selector, as well as combinators, plus, tilde, greater than, and an empty white space. These symbols do not add any specificity in and of themselves. So this one would be class I forgot what that one was. let's take a look at this one real quick. Okay. Here both Rule 1 and Rule 2 have the same specificity. So this and this one, this and this one. Rule 1 uses chaining selector, no space, and Rule 2 uses descendant combinator, the empty space. But both rules have two classes, and the combinator symbol itself does not add the specificity. This example shows the same thing, even though Rule 2 is using a child combinator. This does not change the specificity value. Both rules have two classes, so they have the same specificity values. So this and any child second class, this. In this example, Rule 2 would have higher specificity, and the orange value would take precedence for this element. Rule 2 uses type selector, which has the lowest specificity value, but Rule 1 uses universal selector, which has no specificity value. Inheritance. Inheritance refers to certain CSS properties that, when applied to an element, are inherited by the element's descendants, even if we don't explicitly write a rule for those descendants. Typography-based properties, color, font size, font family, etc., are usually inherited, while most other properties aren't. The exception to this is when directly targeting an element, as this always beats inheritance. So div ID parent, div class child. So parent, right? Child. Despite the parent element having a higher specificity with an ID, the child element would have the color blue. Style applied since the declaration directly targets it, while color red from the parent is only inherited. Rule order. The final factor, the end of the line, the tiebreaker of the tiebreaker. Let's say that after every other factor has been taken into account, there are still multiple conflicting rules targeting an element. How does the cascade determine which rule to apply? Really simple, actually. Whichever rule has the last defined is the winner. Whichever rule was the last defined is the winner. For an element that has both the alert and warning classes, the cascade would run through every other factor, including inheritance, none here, and specificity, neither rule is more specific than the other. Since the class warning rule was the last one defined, and no other factor was able to determine which rule to apply, it is the one that gets applied to the element. Adding CSS to HTML. Okay, we went over quite a bit so far. The only thing left to do now is to go over how to add all the CSS to our HTML. There are three methods to do so. External CSS is the most common method you will come across, and it involves creating a separate file for the CSS and linking it inside of the HTML opening and closing head tags with a self-closing link element. So let's go ahead and do that. Oh, now is our okay, so let's go in here. Okay, let's go ahead and cd into repos, cd into Odin recipes, right? And let's touch a style.css in here. Okay. And we need to link it in our head. And we'll add a link. And we'll call it style sheet. And we're going to reference our style.css. Right. Okay, so now since we have our style sheet linked, first we add a self-closing link. I'm like, should I put this in a div or should I just... First we add a self-closing link, okay? The href attribute is the location of the CSS file, either an absolute URL or what you'll be utilizing. A URL relative to the location of the HTML file. In our example above, we are assuming both files are located in the same directory. The rel attribute is required, and it specifies the relationship between the HTML file and the linked file. Then inside of the newly created style.css file, we have the selector, div and p, followed by a pair of opening and closing curly braces, which create a declaration block. Finally, we place any declaration inside of the declaration block color. White is one declaration, with color being the property and white being the value, and background color black is another declaration. Note, on file name, style.css is just what we want, or is just what we went with as a file name here. You can name the file whatever you want as long as the file type is .css. Though style or styles is most commonly used, a couple of the pros to this method are: keep your HTML and CSS separated, which results in the HTML file being smaller and making things look cleaner. We only need to edit the CSS in one place, which is especially handy for websites with many pages that all share similar styles. Internal CSS, or embedded CSS, involves adding the CSS within the HTML file itself instead of creating a completely separate file. With the internal method, you place all the rules inside of a pair of opening and closing style tags, which are then placed inside of the opening and closing head tags of your HTML file. Since the styles are being placed directly inside of the head tags, we no longer need a link element. Okay, so this is if you want to put it there. And then inline CSS, we can style directly inside of the HTML file. First thing you need to know is that we don't actually use any selectors here, since the styles are being added directly to the opening div tag itself. Next we have the style attribute, which its value within the pair of quotation marks being declared. I wonder if I can go like this, right? And if I'm able to just... right? want to see how that looks. Or is that not a good practice? Okay. Okay. Let's just leave that how that is, right? We don't want to touch that. But I guess what we could do what if we add right? Okay. What if we did it like that and we added a class home background, right? And if we go in here and we do a dot home background, background color, and let's make it aquamarine, right? So instead of it being here, what if we added that here instead? Okay. So what if we let's see how this looks. No? Let's call this food list. Okay. And let's declare it as food list. No? sorry. I wonder if text align will work. Text align center. Okay. But now they kind of stagger now. I wonder why. Okay. Okay, anyway, I'm spending too much time on that. We'll mess with this later. Okay, actually, for now, let's just go ahead and undo everything we just did. Let's just remove that. Remove that. I don't think I have any classes. Right? Oh, background, right? Okay. Let's keep it back to what it was. Okay. We can worry about this in a little while. Okay, so first we add a self-closing link element inside of the opening and closing head tags, HTML files, href attribute. Okay. Inline practice. Go to CSS exercise repository, read the README, and only do the exercise in the Foundations directory in the order they're listed, starting with 01 CSS message and ending with 06 Cascade fix. Remember, the recipe page you created as practice from previous lesson, well, it's rather plain looking, isn't it? Let's fix that by adding some CSS to it. Okay, so first we're going to want to get that repository. Cool. So let's actually do that. Let's go grab the repository. Oops. Ah, okay. So I can go and let's CD up. Just take a look. Alright, we're gonna do git clone and we'll copy this. Control Shift V. Okay, so I'll just let that go. I believe we're also going to have to pull now let's see. Okay, so we got the CSS exercises now installed. Okay. Again, I hope you guys are enjoying the lesson. I know we're going pretty long today, but we want to get through this. And this is barely just an introduction. It's pretty nice. Okay, so now since we have that, right, it wants us to go through O1 through O whatever. But let's go into our Odin recipes. And we're gonna get status we're gonna do git commit added style sheet and added a style sheet and class added CSS file and added class to body. Alright, it's git add. Oh god. Okay, so you got to practice using that. So now when we go back here, everything's nice and saved. And what we're going to do is we're going to exit out of here for now. And we're going to go into the repos directory and we're going to CD into the CSS. Excuse me. into the CSS exercise directory, and we're going to take a look. So first it's set to read the README, but we're actually past the hour mark, so we're going to go ahead and stop the live stream here. I want to say thank you all for tuning in. Appreciate y'all. I'll probably be coming back on here shortly, but I'll talk to y'all soon. Thank you so much.